or Stepping Stones to Fame and Fortune, by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 8. The Conquest of Obstacles. Nature, when she adds difficulties, adds brains. Emerson. Exigencies create the necessary ability to meet and conquer them. Wendell Phillips. Many men owe the grandeur of their lives to their tremendous difficulties. Spurgeon. The rugged metal of the mine must burn before its surface shine. Byron. When a man looks through a tear in his own eye, that is a lens which opens reaches in the unknown and reveals orbs no telescope could do. Beecher. No man ever worked his way in a dead calm. John Neal. Kites rise against, not with, the wind. Then welcome each rebuff that turns earth's smoothness rough, each sting that bids nor sit nor stand, but go. Browning. What a fine profession ours would be if there were no gibbets, said one of two highwaymen who chanced to pass a gallows. Tut, tut, ye blockhead, replied the other. Gibbets are the making of us, for if there were no gibbets, everyone would be a highwayman. Just so with every art, trade, or pursuit. It is the difficulties that scare and keep out unworthy competitors. Life, says a philosopher, refuses to be so adjusted as to eliminate from it all strife and conflict and pain. There are 1,000 tasks that, in larger interests than ours, must be done, whether we want them or no. The world refuses to walk upon tiptoe so that we may be able to sleep. It gets up very early and stays up very late. And all the while there is the conflict of myriads of hammers and saws and axes with the stubborn material that in no other way can be made to serve its use and do its work for man. And then, too, these hammers and axes are not wielded without strain or pang, but swung by the millions of toilers who labor with their cries and groans and tears. Nay, our temple building, whether it be for God or man, exacts its bitter toll, and fills life with cries and blows. The 1,000 rivalries of our daily business, the fierce animosities when we are beaten, the even fiercer exultation when we have beaten, the crashing blows of disaster, the piercing scream of defeat, these things we have not yet gotten rid of, nor in this life ever will. Why should we wish to get rid of them? We are here, my brother, to be hewed and hammered and planed in God's quarry and on God's anvil for a nobler life to come. Only the muscle that is used is developed. Troubles are often the tools by which God fashions us for better things, said Beecher. Far up the mountainside lies a block of granite, and says to itself, "How happy am I in my serenity! Above the winds, above the trees, almost above the flight of birds, here I rest age after age, and nothing disturbs me." Yet what is it? It is only a bare block of granite, jutting out of the cliff, and its happiness is the happiness of death. By and by comes the miner, and with strong and repeated strokes he drills a hole in its top, and the rock says, "What does this mean?" Then the black powder is poured in, and with a blast that makes the mountain echo, the block is blown asunder, and goes crashing down into the valley. "Ah!" it exclaims as it falls, "why this rending?" Then come saws to cut and fashion it, and humbled now, and willing to be nothing, it is borne away from the mountain and conveyed to the city. Now it is chiseled and polished, till at length finished in beauty, by block and tackle it is raised, with mighty hoistings, high in the air, to be the top-stone on some monument of the country's glory. It is this scantiness of means, this continual deficiency, this constant hitch, this perpetual struggle to keep the head above water and the wolf from the door, that keeps society from falling to pieces. Let every man have a few more dollars than he wants, and anarchy would follow. "Do you wish to live without a trial?" asks a modern teacher. "Then you wish to die but half a man. Without trial you cannot guess at your own strength. Men do not learn to swim on a table. They must go into deep water and buffet the waves. Hardship is the native soil of manhood and self-reliance. Trials are rough teachers, but rugged schoolmasters make rugged pupils. A man who goes through life prosperous, and comes to his grave without a wrinkle, is not half a man. Difficulties are God's errands, and when we are sent upon them, we should esteem it a proof of God's confidence. We should reach after the highest good." Suddenly, with much jarring and jolting, an electric car came to a standstill just in front of a heavy truck that was headed in an opposite direction. The huge truck wheels were sliding uselessly round on the car tracks that were wet and slippery from rain. All the urging of the teamster and the straining of the horses were in vain, until the motorman quietly tossed a shovelful of sand on the track under the heavy wheels, and then the truck lumbered on its way. "Friction is a very good thing," remarked a passenger. There is a beautiful tale of Scandinavian mythology. A hero, under the promise of becoming a demigod, is bidden in the celestial halls to perform 3 test acts of prowess. He is to drain the drinking horn of Thor. Then he must run a race with a courser so fleet that he fairly spurns the ground under his flying footsteps. Then he must wrestle with a toothless old woman, whose sinewy hands, as wiry as eagle claws in the grapple, make his very flesh to quiver. He is victorious in them all. But as the crown of success is placed upon his temples, he discovers for the first time that he has had for his antagonist the 3 greatest forces of nature. He raced with thought. He wrestled with old age. He drank the sea. Nature, like the God of nature, wrestles with us as a friend, not an enemy, wanting us to gain the victory, and wrestles with us that we may understand and enjoy her best blessings. Every greatest and highest earthly good has come to us unfolded and enriched by this terrible wrestling with nature. A curious society still exists in Paris, composed of dramatic authors who meet once a month and dine together. Their number has no fixed limit, only every member to be eligible must have been hissed. An eminent dramatist is selected for chairman and holds the post for 3 months. His election generally follows close upon a splendid failure. Some of the world-famous ones have enjoyed this honor. Dumas Jr., Zola, and Offenbach have all filled this chair and presided at the monthly dinner. These dinners are given on the last Friday of the month, and are said to be extraordinarily hilarious. "I do believe God wanted a grand poem of that man," said George MacDonald of Milton, "and so blinded him that he might be able to write it." "Returned with thanks," has made many an author. Failure often leads a man to success by arousing his latent energy, by firing a dormant purpose, by awakening powers which were sleeping. Men of metal turn disappointments into helps, as the oyster turns into pearls the sand which annoys it. Let the adverse breath of criticism be to you only what the blast of the storm wind is to the eagle, a force against him that lifts him higher. I do not see, says Emerson, how any man can afford, for the sake of his nerves and his nap, to spare any action in which he can partake. It is pearls and rubies to his discourse. Drudgery, calamity, exasperation, want are instructors in eloquence and wisdom. The true scholar grudges every opportunity of action passed by as a loss of power. Adversity is a severe instructor, says Edmund Burke, set over us by one who knows us better than we do ourselves, as he loves us better too. He that wrestles with us strengthens our nerves and sharpens our skill. Our antagonist is our helper. This conflict with difficulty makes us acquainted with our object, and compels us to consider it in all its relations. It will not suffer us to be superficial. Strong characters, like the palm tree, seem to thrive best when most abused. Men who have stood up bravely under great misfortune for years are often unable to bear prosperity. Their good fortune takes the spring out of their energy, as the torrid zone enervates races accustomed to a vigorous climate. Some people never come to themselves until baffled, rebuffed, thwarted, defeated, crushed in the opinion of those around them. Trials unlock their virtues. Defeat is the threshold of their victory. Every man who makes a fortune has been more than once a bankrupt, if the truth were known, says Albion Tourget. Grant's failure as a subaltern made him commander-in-chief, and for myself, my failure to accomplish what I set out to do led me to what I never had aspired to. What is defeat? Asked Wendell Phillips. Nothing but education. And a life's disaster may become the landmark from which there has begun a new era, a broader life for man. To make his way at the bar, said an eminent jurist, a young man must live like a hermit and work like a horse. There is nothing that does a young lawyer so much good as to be half-starved. We are the victors of our opponents. They have developed in us the very power by which we overcome them. Without their opposition, we could never have braced and anchored and fortified ourselves, as the oak is braced and anchored for its 1,000 battles with the tempests. Our trials, our sorrows, and our griefs develop us in a similar way. Obstacles, says Mitchell, are great incentives. I lived for whole years upon Virgil and found myself well off. Poverty, Horace tells us, drove him to poetry. Nothing more unmans a man than to take away from him the spur of necessity which urges him onward and upward to the goal of his ambition. Man is naturally lazy, and wealth induces indolence. The great object of life is development, the unfolding and drawing out of our powers, and whatever tempts us to a life of indolence or inaction, or to seek pleasure merely, whatever furnishes us a crutch when we can develop our muscles better by walking, all helps, guides, props, whatever tempts a life of inaction, in whatever guise it may come, is a curse. I always pity the boy or girl with inherited wealth, for the temptation to hide their talents in a napkin, undeveloped, is very, very great. It is not natural for them to walk when they can ride, to go alone when they can be helped. Quentin Matsys was a blacksmith at Antwerp. When in his 20th year, he wished to marry the daughter of a painter. The father refused his consent. "Wert thou a painter," said he, "she should be thine, but a blacksmith, Never." "I will be a painter," said the young man. He applied his new art with so much perseverance that in a short time he produced pictures which gave a promise of the highest excellence. He gained for his reward the fair hand for which he sighed, and rose ere long to a high rank in his profession. Take two acorns from the same tree, as nearly alike as possible. Plant one on a hill by itself, and the other in a dense forest, and watch them grow. The oak standing alone is exposed to every storm. Its roots reach out in every direction, clutching the rocks and piercing deep into the earth. Every rootlet lends itself to steady the growing giant, as if in anticipation of fierce conflict with the elements. Sometimes its upward growth seems checked for years, but all the while it has been expending its energy in pushing a root against a large rock to gain a firmer anchorage. Then it shoots proudly aloft again, prepared to defy the hurricane. The gales which sport so rudely with its wide branches find more than their match, and only serve still further to toughen the very minutest fiber from pith to bark. The acorn planted in the deep forest shoots up a weak, slender sapling. Shielded by its neighbors, it feels no need of spreading its roots far and wide for support. Take two boys, as nearly alike as possible. Place one in the country away from the hothouse culture and refinements of the city, with only the district school, the Sunday school, and a few books. Remove wealth and props of every kind, and if he has the right kind of material in him, he will thrive. Every obstacle overcome lends him strength for the next conflict. If he falls, he rises with more determination than before. Like a rubber ball, the harder the obstacle he meets, the higher he rebounds. Obstacles and opposition are but apparatus of the gymnasium in which the fibers of his manhood are developed. He compels respect and recognition from those who have ridiculed his poverty. Put the other boy in a Vanderbilt family. Give him French and German nurses. Gratify every wish. Place him under the tutelage of great masters and send him to Harvard. Give him thousands a year for spending money, and let him travel extensively. The two meet. The city lad is ashamed of his country brother. The plain, threadbare clothes, hard hands, tawny face, and awkward manner of the country boy make sorry contrast with the genteel appearance of the other. The poor boy bemoans his hard lot, regrets that he has, quote, "no chance in life," unquote, and envies the city youth. He thinks that it is a cruel providence that places such a wide gulf between them. They meet again as men, but how changed! It is as easy to distinguish the sturdy, self-made man from the one who has been propped up all his life by wealth, position, and family influence, as it is for the shipbuilder to tell the difference between the plank from the rugged mountain oak and one from the sapling of the forest. If you think there is no difference, place each plank in the bottom of a ship and test them in a hurricane at sea. The athlete does not carry the gymnasium away with him, but he carries the skill and muscle which gave him his reputation. The lessons you learn at school will give you strength and skill in after life, and power just in proportion to the accuracy, the clearness of perception with which you learn your lessons. The school was your gymnasium. You do not carry away the Greek and Latin textbooks, the geometry and algebra into your occupations any more than the athlete carries the apparatus of the gymnasium. But you carry away the skill and the power if you have been painstaking, accurate, and faithful. It is in me, and it shall come out. And it did. For Richard Brinsley Sheridan became the most brilliant, eloquent, and amazing statesman of his day. Yet if his first efforts had been but moderately successful, he might have been content with mere mediocrity. It was his defeats that nerved him to strive for eminence and win it. But it took hard, persistent work in his case to secure it, just as it did in that of so many others. Byron was stung into a determination to go to the top by a scathing criticism of his first book, Hours of Idleness, published when he was but 19 years of age. Macaulay said, "There is scarce an instance in history of so sudden a rise to so dizzy an eminence as Byron reached." In a few years he stood by the side of such men as Scott, Southey, and Campbell. Many an orator like Stuttering Jack Curran, or Orator Mum, as he was once called, has been spurred into eloquence by ridicule and abuse. Where the sky is gray and the climate unkindly, where the soil yields nothing save to the diligent hand, and life itself cannot be supported without incessant toil, man has reached his highest range of physical and intellectual development. The most beautiful and the strongest animals, as a rule, have come from the same narrow belt of latitude which has produced the heroes of the world. The most beautiful as well as the strongest characters are not developed in warm climates, where a man finds his bread ready-made on trees, and where exertion is a great effort, but rather in a trying climate and on a stubborn soil. It is no chance that returns to the Hindu ryot a penny, and to the American laborer $1 for his daily toil, that makes Mexico with her mineral wealth poor, and New England with its granite and ice rich. It is rugged necessity, it is the struggle to obtain, it is poverty, the priceless spur, that develops the stamina of manhood, and calls the race out of barbarism. Labor found the world a wilderness, and has made it a garden. The law of adaptation by which conditions affect an organism is simple and well known. It is that which calluses the palm of the oarsman, strengthens the waist of the wrestler, fits the back to its burden. It inexorably compels the organism to adapt itself to its conditions, to like them, and so to survive them. As soon as young eagles can fly, the old birds tumble them out, and tear the down and feathers from their nest. The rude and rough experience of the eaglet fits him to become the bold king of birds, fierce and expert in pursuing his prey. Benjamin Franklin ran away, and George Law was turned out of doors. Thrown upon their own resources, they early acquired the energy and skill to overcome difficulties. Boys who are bound out, crowded out, kicked out, usually turn out, while those who do not have these disadvantages frequently fail to come out. From an aimless, idle, and useless brain, emergencies often call out powers and virtues before unknown and unsuspected. How often we see a young man develop astounding ability and energy after the death of a parent or the loss of a fortune, or after some other calamity has knocked the props and crutches from under him. The prison has roused the slumbering fire in many a noble mind. Robinson Crusoe was written in prison. The Pilgrim's Progress appeared in Bedford jail. The Life and Times of Baxter, Eliot's Monarchia of Man, and Penn's No Cross, No Crown were written by prisoners. Sir Walter Raleigh wrote the history of the world during his imprisonment of 13 years. Luther translated the Bible while confined in the castle of Wartburg. For 20 years Dante worked in exile, and even under sentence of death. His works were burned in public after his death, but genius will not burn. Adversity exasperates fools, dejects cowards, draws out the faculties of the wise and industrious, puts the modest to the necessity of trying their skill, awes the opulent, and makes the idle industrious. Neither do uninterrupted success and prosperity qualify men for usefulness and happiness. The storms of adversity, like those of the ocean, rouse the faculties, and excite the invention, prudence, skill, and fortitude of the voyager. The martyrs of ancient times, in bracing their minds to outward calamities, acquired a loftiness of purpose and a moral heroism worth a lifetime of softness and security. A man upon whom continuous sunshine falls is like the earth in August. He becomes parched and dry and hard and close-grained. Men have drawn from adversity the elements of greatness. If you have the blues, go and see the poorest and sickest families within your knowledge. The darker the setting, the brighter the diamond. Don't run about and tell acquaintances that you have been unfortunate. People do not like to have unfortunate men for acquaintances. This is the crutch age. Helps and aids are advertised everywhere. We have institutes, colleges, universities, teachers, books, libraries, newspapers, magazines. Our thinking is done for us. Our problems are all worked out in explanations and keys. Our boys are too often tutored through college with very little study. Short roads and abridged methods are characteristic of the century. Ingenious methods are used everywhere to get the drudgery out of the college course. Newspapers give us our politics, and preachers our religion. Self-help and self-reliance are getting old-fashioned. Nature, as if conscious of delayed blessings, has rushed to man's relief with her wondrous forces, and undertakes to do the world's drudgery and emancipate him from Eden's curse. End of chapter 8. Recording by David Martin.
Or Stepping Stones to Fame and Fortune by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 9. Dead in Earnest. It is the live coal that kindles others, not the dead. What made Demosthenes the greatest of all orators was that he appeared the most entirely possessed by the feelings he wished to inspire. The effect produced by Charles Fox, who, by exaggerations of party spirit, was often compared to Demosthenes, seems to have arisen wholly from this earnestness, which made up for want of almost every grace, both of manner and style. Anonymous. 12 poor men taken out of boats and creeks, without any help of learning, should conquer the world to the cross. Stephen Carnock. For his heart was in his work, and the heart giveth grace unto every art. Longfellow. He did it with all his heart, and prospered. 2 Chronicles. The only conclusive evidence of a man's sincerity is that he gives himself for a principle. Words, money, all things else, are comparatively easy to give away. But when a man makes a gift of his daily life and practice, it is plain that the truth, whatever it may be, has taken possession of him. Lowell. The emotions, says Whipple, may all be included in the single word enthusiasm, or that impulsive force which liberates the mental power from the ice of timidity, as spring loosens the streams from the grasp of winter, and sends them forth in a rejoicing rush. The mind of youth, when impelled by this original strength and enthusiasm of nature, is keen, eager, inquisitive, intense, audacious, rapidly assimilating facts into faculties, and knowledge into power, and, above all, teeming with that joyous fullness of creative life which radiates thoughts as inspiration, and magnetizes as well as informs. Columbus, my hero, exclaims Carlyle, royalist sea king of all. It is no friendly environment this of thine, in the waste deep waters. Around thee, mutinous discouraged souls. Behind thee, disgrace and ruin. Before thee, the unpenetrated veil of night. Brother, these wild water mountains, bounding from their deep bases, 10 miles deep, I am told, are not there on thy behalf. Meseems they have other work than floating thee forward, and the huge winds that sweep from Ursa Major to the tropics and equator, dancing their giant waltz through the kingdoms of chaos and immensity, they care little about filling rightly or filling wrongly the small shoulder of mutton sails in this cockle skiff of thine. Thou art not among articulate speaking friends, my brother, thou art among immeasurable dumb monsters, tumbling, howling wide as the world here. Secret, far off, invisible to all hearts but thine, there lies a help in them. See how thou wilt get at that. Patiently thou wilt wait till the mad sou'wester spend itself, saving thyself by dexterous science of defence the while. Valiantly, with swift decision, thou wilt strike in where the favouring east wind, the possible, springs up. Mutiny of men thou wilt sternly repress. Weakness, despondency, thou wilt cheerily encourage. Thou wilt swallow down complaint, unreason, weariness, weakness of others and thyself. How much wilt thou swallow down? And there shall be a depth of silence in thee, deeper than this sea, which is but 10 miles deep. A silence unsoundable, known to God only. Thou shalt be a great man. Yes, my world soldier, thou of the world marine service, thou wilt have to be greater than this tumultuous, unmeasured world here round thee is. Thou, in thy strong soul, as with a wrestler's arms, shall embrace it, harness it down, and make it bear thee on, to new Americas, or whither God wills. With what concentration of purpose did Washington put the whole weight of his character into the scales of our cause in the Revolution? With what earnest singleness of aim did Lincoln, in the cabinet, Grant, in the field, throw his whole soul into the contest of our Civil War? The power of Phillips Brooke, at which men wondered, lay in his tremendous earnestness. No matter what your work is, says Emerson, let it be yours. No matter if you are a tinker or preacher, blacksmith or president, let what you are doing be organic. Let it be in your bones, and you open the door by which the affluence of heaven and earth shall stream into you. Again, he says, God will not have his works made manifest by cowards. A man is relieved and gay when he has put his heart into his work and done his best. But what he has said or done otherwise shall give him no peace. It is a deliverance which does not deliver. In the attempt, his genius deserts him, no muse befriends, no invention, no hope. I do not know how it is with others when speaking on an important question, said Henry Clay, but on such occasions I seem to be unconscious of the external world. Wholly engrossed by the subject before me, I lose all sense of personal identity, of time, or of surrounding objects. I have been so busy for 20 years trying to save the souls of other people, said Livingstone, that I had forgotten that I had one of my own, until a savage auditor asked me if I felt the influence of the religion I was advocating. Well, I've worked hard enough for it, said Malibran, when a critic expressed his admiration of her D in alt, reached by running up 3 octaves from low D. I've been chasing it for a month. I pursued it everywhere, when I was dressing, when I was doing my hair, and at last I found it on the toe of a shoe that I was putting on. People smile at the enthusiasm of youth, said Charles Kingsley, that enthusiasm which they secretly look back at with a sigh, perhaps unconscious that it is partly their own fault that they ever lost it. Should I die this minute, said Nelson at an important crisis, want of frigates would be found written on my heart. Said Dr. Arnold, the celebrated instructor, I feel more and more the need of intercourse with men who take life in earnest. It is painful to me to be always on the surface of things. Not that I wish for much of what is called religious conversation. That is often apt to be on the surface. But I want a sign which one catches by a sort of masonry, that a man knows what he is about in life. When I find this, it opens my heart with as fresh a sympathy as when I was 20 years younger. Archimedes, the greatest geometer of antiquity, was consulted by the king in regard to a gold crown suspected of being fraudulently alloyed with silver. While considering the best method of detecting any fraud, he plunged into a full bathing tub, and, with the thought that the water that overflowed must be equal in weight to his body, he discovered the method of obtaining the bulk of the crown compared with an equally heavy mass of pure gold. Excited by the discovery, he ran through the streets undressed, crying, "I have found it!" Equally celebrated is his remark, "Give me where to stand, and I will move the world." His only remark to the Roman soldier who entered his room while engaged in geometrical study was, "Don't step on my circle." Refusing to follow the soldier to Marcellus, who had captured the city, he was killed on the spot. He is said to have remarked, "My head, but not my circle." Every great and commanding moment in the annals of the world, says Emerson, is the triumph of some enthusiasm. The victories of the Arabs after Mahomet, who in a few years, from a small and mean beginning, established a larger empire than that of Rome, is an example. They did they knew not what. The naked Derar, horse on an idea, was found an overmatch for a troop of cavalry. The women fought like men, and conquered the Roman men. They were miserably equipped, miserably fed. They were temperance troops. There was neither brandy nor flesh needed to feed them. They conquered Asia and Africa and Spain on barley. Caliph Omar's walking stick struck more terror into those who saw it than another man's sword. Horace Vernet's enthusiasm and devotion to one idea of his life knew no bounds. He had himself lashed to the mast in a terrible gale on the Mediterranean, when all others on board were seized with terror, and with great delight sketched the towering waves which threatened every minute to swallow the vessel. Several writers tell the story that a great artist, Giotto, about to paint the Crucifixion, induced a poor man to let him bind him upon a cross, in order that he might get a better idea of the terrible scene that he was about to put upon the canvas. He promised faithfully that he would release his model in an hour, but, to the latter's horror, the painter seized a dagger and plunged it into his heart, and while the blood was streaming from the ghastly wound, painted his death agony. Beecher was a very dull boy, and the last member of the family of whom anything was expected. He had a weak memory, and disliked study. He shunned society, and wanted to go to sea. Even when he went to college, many of his classmates stood ahead of him, who have fallen into oblivion. But when he was converted, his whole life changed. He was full of enthusiasm, hopefulness, and zeal. Nothing was too menial for him to undertake to carry his purpose. He chopped wood, built the fire in his little church in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, of only 18 members, cleaned the lamps, swept the floor, and washed the windows. He built the fire, baked, washed when his wife was ill. The pent-up enthusiasm of his ambitious life burst the barriers of his inhospitable surroundings until he blossomed out into America's greatest pulpit orator. When Handel was a little boy, he bought a clavichord, hid it in the attic, and went there at night to play upon it, muffling the strings with small pieces of fine woolen cloth, so that the sound should not waken the family. Michelangelo neglected school to copy drawings which he dared not carry home. Murillo filled the margin of his schoolbook with drawings. Dryden read Polybius before he was 10 years old. Lebrun, when a boy, drew with a piece of charcoal on the walls of the house. Pope wrote excellent verses at 14. Blaise Pascal, the French mathematician, composed at 16 a tract on the conic sections. Professor Agassiz was so enthusiastic in his work, and so loved the fishes, the fowl, and the cattle, that it is said these creatures would die for him to give them their skeletons. His father wanted him to fit for commercial life, but the fish haunted him day and night. Confucius said that he was so eager in the pursuit of knowledge that he forgot his food, and that, in the joys of its attainment, he forgot his sorrows, and that he did not even perceive that old age was coming on. "The boy that tries to make himself useful," said an employer of the errand boy, George W. Childs. "It is this trying to be useful and helpful that promotes us in life." Once when Mr. Harvey, an accomplished mathematician, was in a bookseller's shop, he saw a poor lad of mean appearance enter and write something on a slip of paper and give it to the proprietor. On inquiry, he found this was a poor deaf boy, Kitto, who afterwards became one of the most noted biblical scholars in the world, and who wrote his first book in the poorhouse. He had come to borrow a book. When a lad, he had fallen backwards from a ladder 35 feet upon the pavement, with a load of slates he was carrying to the roof. The poor lad was so thirsty for books that he would borrow from booksellers who would loan them to him out of pity, read them, and return them. The youth's companion says that Mr. Edison, in his new biography, his Life and Inventions, describes the accidental method by which he discovered the principle of the phonograph. There is a kind of accident that happens only to a certain kind of man. I was singing to the mouthpiece of a telephone, Mr. Edison says, when the vibrations of the voice sent the fine steel point into my finger. That set me to thinking. If I could record the actions of the point, and send the point over the same surface afterward, I saw no reason why the thing would not talk. I tried the experiment first on a slip of telegraph paper, and found that the point made an alphabet. I shouted the words, "Halloo, halloo," into the mouthpiece, ran the paper back over the steel point, and heard a faint "halloo, halloo" in return. I determined to make a machine that would work accurately, and gave my assistants instructions, telling them what I had discovered. They laughed at me. That's the whole story. The phonograph is the result of the pricking of a finger. It is one thing to hit upon an idea, however, and another thing to carry it out to perfection. The machine would talk, but like many young children, it had difficulty with certain sounds, in the present case with aspirants and sibilants. Mr. Edison's biographers say, but the statement is somewhat exaggerated, he has frequently spent from 15 to 20 hours daily, for 6 or 7 months on a stretch, dinning the word spezia, for example, into the stubborn surface of the wax. "Spezia!" roared the inventor. "Petzia!" lisped the phonograph in tones of ladylike reserve, and so on through the thousands of graded repetitions till the desired results were obtained. The primary education of the phonograph was comical in the extreme. To hear those grave and reverend signors, rich in scientific honours, patiently reiterating, "Mary had a little lamb, lamb, lamb," and elaborating that point with anxious gravity, was to receive a practical demonstration of the eternal unfitness of things. Milton, when blind, old, and poor, showed a royal cheerfulness, and never bated one jot of heart or hope, but steered right onward. Dickens's characters seemed to possess him, and haunt him day and night, until properly portrayed in his stories. At a time when it was considered dangerous to society in Europe for the common people to read books and listen to lectures on any but religious subjects, Charles Knight determined to enlighten the masses by cheap literature. He believed that a paper could be instructive and not be dull, cheap without being wicked. He started the Penny Magazine, which acquired a circulation of 200,000 the first year. Knight projected the Penny Cyclopedia, the library of entertaining knowledge, half hours with the best authors, and other useful books at a low price. His whole adult life was spent in the work of elevating the common people by cheap yet wholesome publications. He died in poverty, but grateful people have erected a noble monument over his ashes. Demosthenes roused the torpid spirits of his countrymen to a vigorous effort to preserve their independence against the designs of an ambitious and artful prince, and Philip had just reason to say he was more afraid of that man than of all the fleets and armies of the Athenians. Horace Greeley was a hampered genius, who never had a chance to show himself until he started the Tribune, into which he poured his whole individuality, life, and soul. Emerson lost the first years of his life trying to be someone else. He finally came to himself and said, "If a single man plant himself indomitably on his instincts, and there abide, the whole world will come round to him in the end. Though we travel the world over to find the beautiful, we must carry it with us, or we find it not. The man that stands by himself, the universe stands by him also." Take Michelangelo's course, to confide in oneself and be something of worth and value. None of us will ever accomplish anything excellent or commanding, except when he listens to this whisper, which is heard by him alone. Many unknown writers would make fame and fortune if, like Bunyan and Milton and Dickens and George Eliot and Scott and Emerson, they would write down their own lives in their manuscripts, if they would write about things they have seen, that they have felt, that they have known. It is the life thoughts that stir and convince, that move and persuade, that carry their very iron particles into the blood. The real heaven has never been outdone by the ideal. Neither poverty nor misfortune could keep Linnaeus from his botany. The English and Austrian armies called Napoleon the 100,000 man. His presence was considered equal to that force in battle. The lesson he teaches is that which vigour always teaches, that there is always room for it. To what heap of cowardly doubts is not that man's life an answer? End of chapter 9. Dead in Earnest. Recording by Lucas Balding.
To be great, concentrate. Let everyone ascertain his special business and calling, and stick to it. Franklin. He who follows two hares is sure to catch neither. None sends his arrow to the mark in view, whose hand is feeble or his aim untrue. Cowper. He who wishes to fulfill his mission must be a man of one idea, that is, of one great overmastering purpose, overshadowing all of his aims and guiding and controlling his entire life. Bate. The shortest way to do anything is to do only one thing at a time. Cecil. The power of concentration is one of the most valuable of intellectual attainments. Horace Mann. The power of a man increases steadily by continuance in one direction. Emerson. Careful attention to one thing often proves superior to genius and art. Cicero. It puffed like a locomotive, said a boy of the donkey engine. It whistled like the steam cars, but it didn't go anywhere. The world is full of donkey engines, of people who can whistle and puff and pull, but they don't go anywhere. They have no definite aim, no controlling purpose. The great secret of Napoleon's power lay in his marvelous ability to concentrate his forces upon a single point. After finding the weak place in the enemy's ranks, he would mass his men and hurl them upon the enemy like an avalanche until he made a breach. What a lesson of the power of concentration there is in that man's life! He was such a master of himself that he could concentrate his powers upon the smallest detail as well as upon an empire. When Napoleon had anything to say, he always went straight to his mark. He had a purpose in everything he did. There was no dilly-dallying nor shilly-shallying. He knew what he wanted to say and said it. It was the same with all of his plans. What he wanted to do, he did. He always hit the bullseye. His great success in war was due largely to his definiteness of aim. He knew what he wanted to do and did it. He was like a great burning glass, concentrating the rays of the sun upon a single spot. He burned a hole wherever he went. The sun's rays scattered do no execution, but concentrated in a burning glass, they melt solid granite. Yes, a diamond even. There are plenty of men who have ability enough. The rays of their faculties taken separately are all right, but they are powerless to collect them, to concentrate them upon a single object. They lack the burning glass of a purpose to focalize upon one spot the separate rays of their ability. Versatile men, universal geniuses, are usually weak because they have no power to concentrate the rays of their ability, to focalize them upon one point until they burn a hole in whatever they undertake. This power to bring all of one's scattered forces into one focal point makes all the difference between success and failure. The sun might blaze out upon the earth forever without burning a hole in it or setting anything on fire, whereas a very few of these rays, concentrated in a burning glass, would, as stated, transform a diamond into vapor. Sir James Mackintosh was a man of marvelous ability. He excited in everybody who knew him great expectations, but there was no purpose in his life to act as a burning glass to collect the brilliant rays of his intellect, by which he might have dazzled the world. Most men have ability enough, if they could only focalize it into one grand, central, all-absorbing purpose to accomplish great things. To encourage me in my efforts to cultivate the power of attention, said a friend of John C. Calhoun, he stated that to his end he had early subjected his mind to such a rigid course of discipline, and had persisted without faltering until he had acquired a perfect control over it, that he could now confine it to any subject as long as he pleased, without wandering even for a moment, that it was his uniform habit, when he set out alone to walk or ride, to select a subject for reflection, and that he never suffered his attention to wander from it until he was satisfied with its examination. "My friend laughs at me because I have but one idea," said a learned American chemist, "but I have learned that if I wish ever to make a breach in a wall, I must play my guns continually upon one point." "It is his will that has made him what he is," said an intimate friend of Philip D. Armour, the Chicago millionaire. "He fixes his eye on something ahead, and no matter what rises upon the right or the left, he never sees it. He goes straight in pursuit of the object ahead and overtakes it at last. He never gives up what he undertakes." While Horace Greeley would devote a column of the New York Tribune to an article, Thurlow Weed would treat the same subject in a few words in the Albany Evening Journal, and put the argument into such shape as to carry far more conviction. "If you would be pungent," says Southey, "be brief, for it is with words as with sunbeams. The more they are condensed, the deeper they burn." "The only valuable kind of study," said Sidney Smith, "is to read so heartily that dinner time comes 2 hours before you expected it. To sit with your Livy before you and hear the geese cackling that saved the Capitol, and to see with your own eyes the Carthaginian settlers gathering up the rings of the Roman knights after the battle of Cannae, and heaping them into bushels, and to be so intimately present at the actions you are reading of, that when anybody knocks at the door it will take you 2 or 3 seconds to determine whether you are in your own study or on the plains of Lombardy, looking at Hannibal's weather-beaten face and admiring the splendor of his single eye." "Never study on speculation," says Waters. "All such study is vain. Form a plan, have an object, then work for it. Learn all you can about it, and you will be sure to succeed." What I mean by studying on speculation is that aimless learning of things because they may be useful some day, which is like the conduct of the woman who bought at auction a brass door-plate with the name of Thompson on it, thinking it might be useful some day. "I resolved when I began to read law," said Edward Sugden, afterward Lord St. Leonard, "to make everything I acquired perfectly my own, and never go on to a second reading till I had entirely accomplished the first. Many of the competitors read as much in a day as I did in a week, but at the end of 12 months my knowledge was as fresh as on the day it was acquired, while theirs had glided away from their recollection." "Very often," says Sidney Smith, "the modern precept of education is, 'Be ignorant of nothing,' but my advice is, have the courage to be ignorant of a great number of things, so that you may avoid the calamity of being ignorant of all things." "Lord, help me to take fewer things into my hands, and to do them well," is a prayer recommended by Paxton Hood to an overworked man. "Many persons, seeing me so much engaged in active life," said Edward Bulwer Lytton, "and as much about the world as if I had never been a student, have said to me, 'When do you get time to write all of your books? How on earth do you contrive to do so much work?' I shall surprise you by the answer I made. The answer is this: I contrive to do so much work by never doing too much at a time. A man to get through work well must not overwork himself, or if he do too much today, the reaction of fatigue will come, and he will be obliged to do little tomorrow. Now, since I began really and earnestly to study, which was not till I had left college, and was actually in the world, I may perhaps say that I have gone through as large a course of general reading as most men of my time. I have traveled much, and I have seen much. I have mixed much in politics, and in the various businesses of life, And in addition to all of this, I have published somewhere about 60 volumes, some upon subjects requiring much special research. And what time do you think, as a general rule, I have devoted to study, to reading, and writing? Not more than 3 hours a day. And when Parliament is sitting, not always that. But then, during these 3 hours, I have given my whole attention to what I was about. The things that are crowded out of a life are the test of that life. Not what we would like, but what we long for and strive for with all our might we attain. One great cause of failure of young men in business, says Carnegie, is lack of concentration. They are prone to seek outside investments. The cause of many a surprising failure lies in so doing. Every dollar of capital and credit, every business thought, should be concentrated upon the one business upon which a man has embarked. He should never scatter his shot. It is a poor business which would not yield better returns for increased capital than any outside investment. No man or set of men or corporation can manage a businessman's capital as well as he can manage it himself. The rule, do not put all your eggs in one basket, does not apply to a man's life work. Put all your eggs in one basket and then watch that basket is the true doctrine, the most valuable rule of all. A man must not only desire to be right, said Beecher, he must be right. You may say, I wish to send this ball so as to kill the lion crouching yonder, ready to spring upon me. My wishes are all right, and I hope Providence will direct the ball. Providence won't. You must do it, and if you do not, you are a dead man. The ruling idea of Milton's life and the key to his mental history is his resolve to produce a great poem. Not that the aspiration in itself is singular, for it is probably shared in by every poet in his turn. As every clever schoolboy is destined by himself or his friends to become Lord Chancellor, and every private in the French army carries in his haversack the baton of a marshal, so it is a necessary ingredient of the dream of Parnassus that it should embody itself in a form of surpassing brilliance. What distinguishes Milton from the crowd of youthful literary aspirants, au juventa, is his consistency of resolve. He not only nourished through manhood the dream of youth, keeping under the importunate instincts which carry off most ambitions in middle life into the pursuit of place, profit, honor, the thorns which spring up and smother the wheat, but carried out his dream in its integrity in old age. He formed himself for this achievement and no other. Study at home, travel abroad, the arena of political controversy, the public service, the practice of the domestic virtues were so many parts of the schooling which was to make a poet. Bismarck adopted it as the aim of his public life, to snatch Germany from the Austrian oppression, and to gather round Prussia in a North German confederation, all the states whose tone of thought, religion, manners, and interest were in harmony with those of Prussia. To attain this end, he once said in conversation, I would brave all dangers, exile, the scaffold itself. What matter if they hang me, provided the rope with which I am hung binds this new Germany firmly to the Prussian throne. It is related of Greeley that when he was writing his American Conflict, he found it necessary to conceal himself somewhere to prevent constant interruptions. He accordingly took a room in the Bible House, where he worked from 10 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon, and then appeared in the sanctum, seemingly as fresh as ever. Cooper Institute is the evening school which Peter Cooper, as long ago as 1810, resolved to found some day, when he was looking about as an apprentice for a place where he could go to school evenings. Through all his career in various branches of business, he never lost sight of this object. And as his wealth increased, he was pleased that it brought nearer the realization of his dream. See a great lawyer like Rufus Choate, says Dr. Storrs, in a case where his convictions are strong and his feelings are enlisted. He saw long ago, as he glanced over the box, that 5 of those in it were sympathetic with him. As he went on, he became equally certain of 7. The number now has risen to 10, but 2 are still left whom he feels that he has not persuaded or mastered. Upon them He now concentrates his power, summing up the facts, setting forth anew and more forcibly the principles, urging upon them his view of the case with a more and more intense action of his mind upon theirs, until one only is left, like the blow of a hammer, continually repeated until the iron bar crumbles beneath it. His whole force comes with ceaseless percussion on that one mind till it has yielded, and accepts the conviction on which the pleader's purpose is fixed. Men say afterward, he surpassed himself. It was only because the singleness of his aim gave unity, intensity, and overpowering energy to the mind. The foreman of the jury, however, said Whipple, was a hard-hearted, practical man, a model of business intellect and integrity, but with an incapacity of understanding any intellect or conscience radically differing from his own. Mr. Choate's argument, as far as the facts and the law were concerned, were through in an hour. Still he went on speaking. Hour after hour passed, and yet he continued to speak with constantly increasing eloquence, repeating and recapitulating without any seeming reason facts which he had already stated, and arguments which he had already urged. The truth was, as I gradually learned, that he was engaged in a hand-to-hand, or rather in a brain-to-brain, and a heart-to-heart contest with the foreman, whose resistance he was determined to break down, but who confronted him for 3 hours with defiance observable in every rigid line of his honest countenance. "You fool!" was the burden of the advocate's ingenious argument. "You rascal!" was the phrase legibly printed on the foreman's incredulous face. But at last the features of the foreman began to relax, and at the end the stern lines melted into acquiescence with the opinion of the advocate, who had been storming at the defenses of his mind, his heart, and his conscience for 5 hours, and had now entered as victor. The verdict was, "Not guilty." He who would do some great thing in this short life must apply himself to the work with such a concentration of his forces as to idle spectators who live only to amuse themselves looks like insanity. It is generally thought that when a man is said to be dissipated in his habits, he must be a drinking man, or a gambler, or licentious, or all three. But dissipation is of two kinds, coarse and refined. A man can dissipate or scatter all of his mental energies and physical power by indulging in too many respectable diversions, as easily as in habits of a viler nature. Property and its cares make some men dissipated. Too many friends make others. The exactions of society, the balls, parties, receptions, and various entertainments constantly being given and attended by the beau monde, constitutes a most wasting species of dissipation. Others, again, fritter away all their time and strength in political agitations or in controversies and gossip, others in idling with music or some other one of the fine arts, others in feasting or fasting, as their dispositions and feelings incline. But the man of concentration of purpose is never a dissipated man in any sense, good or bad. He has no time to devote to useless trifling of any kind, but puts in as many strokes of faithful work as possible toward the attainment of some definite good. End of chapter 10. Recording by Franklin Canfield.